It is great to have Pat Fraher back here on Sports Spectrum, longtime NBA official. Hi, Pat. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to talk to you. I think the last time we talked to you, we were both cooped up with COVID, not literally in the midst of having COVID, but we were cooped up because of the pandemic and wondering if there was going to be an NBA season. And there was, and you got to work it. And it was a weird time. But it's been 4+ years now. And I figured it was time to have Pat Fraher back and kind of just see what the Lord's been teaching you and showing you. And he's certainly given you some pretty cool opportunities in your job as well, with some higher profile games, including NBA Finals, and you had the Eastern Conference Finals this past season in 2024. So some opportunities to be on a bigger stage. But let's start with the main thing. Let's keep the main thing in Jesus. Tell me about Christ today in the life of Pat Fraher and kind of what he's been showing you and teaching you.
Yeah, it's matured, right? So the last time we spoke over 4 years ago, it was kind of more about the uh, the transition or transformation, if you want to call it, um, and it was it was exciting. It's now I would say it's realizing his he's trying to teach me patience. I'm realizing his presence through both the good and the bad. So adversity sometimes lets you know that he's there as well.
Adversity is such an interesting word because I just spoke at my church a couple days ago and I talked about Psalm 13, which is David crying out to God, "How long, Lord, are you going to abandon me? How long am I going to wait here and not see you in my life?" And then literally 2 verses later, "But I will trust in you, but I will put my faith in you." And adversity is such an interesting thing because, and I mentioned, it can either define us or refine us in our walk with Jesus. Um, why is that? And I think some people run away from God. And the whole point of the sermon that I preached was to run towards God. No matter what comes your way, keep running after him again and again and again. But sometimes that adversity can really be difficult to walk through and still trusting God as Father and as Savior.
Yeah, I just don't want to praise him, when things are good. I've realized that
Yeah.
everything else, when you break it down, can be taken away from you except your faith. And ultimately, in the end, that's all you're going to have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful reminder there. Speaking of reminders, share with people, because a lot of people have not heard your story. And I know 4 years ago it was kind of newer, that you came to faith a little bit later in life. And I would love for you to just kind of rehash your testimony a little bit, because we have a lot of new listeners and different people that have come on to this podcast over the past 4 years. And I think your story is a pretty powerful one to share.
Yeah, I'll try to uh, just hit the high points. I was raised in a Christian home. Went to Catholic grade school, uh, kindergarten through 8th grade. The nuns, the whole deal. I like to say my family had season tickets at church. Um,
Front row seats, right?
Front row, yeah. I had all my boxes checked, and in short, I knew a lot about God. I just didn't know him personally yet. So,
Yeah.
um, high school comes along, and we once we start getting more independence, um, the distance from God grew as my independence did. So, found found a bunch of idols I could now worship. Girls, sports. And then in college, um, when my playing days ended, my officiating days began. So that was the new idol, and thought that was the most important thing. And what was interesting is he didn't sabotage any of that, even though I was clearly idolizing a lot of other things ahead of him. He actually blessed me with everything I thought I wanted. So fast forward out of college, I get in the minor leagues. Spent 7 years in the minors, get hired in the NBA, and then a new idol begins, and it's the American dream.
Mm.
and you start chasing what the world tells you should chase. Um, money, possessions, power, pleasure, all that. And um, lo and behold, he gave me everything I thought I wanted. So had the nice house, the car, the 2.2 kids, even the dog, and I was still empty. So
Mm.
um, eventually we get to a point where I was heading the wrong direction and decided to give my life back to Christ and um, and then yeah, then he gives you a new life in exchange. So it's been pretty exciting.
Where were you, or what was the moment or time frame when this happened? Because you just turned 50 actually this year. I turned 50 late last year, so like I told you, we're pretty much the same age and same stage of life. But where were you when, in terms of life and how this is taking place, when this rebirth happens for you in the Lord?
Yeah, I was actually in Secaucus, New Jersey, when when it happened. But a lot of things were coming together. I was getting hit with a perfect storm. Um, I was given a book by a referee friend, and the book was called "Be a Man," and by Father Larry Richards, and it was written for men, so it was very simple. And the chapter one just kind of punched me in the face and started asking big questions like, "What do you believe?" and
Hmm.
and how you answer those questions, sets up how you live life. And after do you believe in God? An afterlife? Do you believe in both heaven and hell? Do you believe, how about Christ? Is he the Son of God? All these huge questions. Well, the Catholic education sprung into effect, and yes, yes, I checked all my box. I got all the answers on the test right, but then he said, "Are you living the same way that you just profess that you believe?" And there was a huge disconnect. And I realized, you know what, I'm headed in the wrong direction here. So
Hmm.
that's kind of what spearheaded the whole thing.
It's surrender. It sounds like is that a word that resonates with you?
That's a great word, and people hate it because surrender implies defeat and it implies weakness, and yet it's the opposite. It actually leads to victory, and it's actually a strength.
So let's talk about that idolatry that you talked about, because I think a lot of people listening here would say, "Hey, you're still an NBA referee, Pat. So how does the evolution of your faith change the way that you approach your job?" Right? Because you've been doing this for a long time, and I think you made your debut in the early 2000s, and then here we are in 2024, and you've had some great opportunities. Well, how have you been able to? And of course, it's a struggle, but how have you been able to turn this new life, if you will, in Christ into something that doesn't allow you to idolize or to put your identity, into the work that you do, because that's the high profile, like you say, American dream opportunity.
Sure, it goes back to what do you believe, right? So if everything starts with perspective. Do you have an earthly perspective or do you have an eternal perspective? Some people don't believe in eternity. Um, it's a difficult concept to wrap our minds around. But if you do, then is there anything more important than securing that? And I haven't found anything more important. If you think of something, let me know because I'll rearrange my whole life around it. But um, there's nothing more important than that. So you realize, I mean, once you have an eternal perspective, guess what? Everything on this planet is and in this life is temporary. So um, all your achievements, all your possessions, they're all, like I said, they're going to be taken away. So um, you know I like talking to people. What are you chasing in life? What's important to you? Well, what are you investing in? Because we're all investing in something. My point for people who want to listen is you might as well invest in something that's worthwhile.
Yeah, investing in eternal things and not of earthly things. When you started having your life change, right, and this renewal and this surrender that we just talked about, how is that to be able to then share that with others? Because often in the beginning of a renewal in faith, some people come out like guns a blazing, right? Like they're just putting up all the shots and they're just kind of telling everybody about it. And others are kind of like, well, I'm not quite sure how to share this with everybody, and I'm not quite sure if people are going to reject me if I tell them about this. How have you navigated that in terms of sharing your story with others?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, because you try to meet people where they are, and there's different backgrounds and people are in different places. Again, again, not everybody's going to be a willing audience or want to talk about those things. But I'm finding out that there's a lot of people that do enjoy talking about the bigger questions in life. So I kind of start with those. What's the most important thing in your life and why, and kind of go from there.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of people obviously would answer family, and I could just kind of smile and say, you know what, about 7 years ago, I probably would have answered the same thing,
Hmm.
and just get them thinking a little bit, and sometimes it becomes a fruitful conversation, and sometimes we move on to other things.
Do you ever get to talk about your job, or maybe even having your job be a conversation starter to lead to talk about faith?
Sure, as I speak now to the various groups that which I still can't believe want to hear the story or want to listen to me.
Yeah,
Um, you start with that because it people do find the job interesting, and
sure.
it can be, um, and that does give you a foot in the door.
What's your favorite part of the job, and what's your least favorite part of the job?
I like the challenge of the game of the job. There's a lot going on. I mean, it's not only rules, but it's managing personalities, and it's trying to uphold the integrity of the game and fairness and consistency night to night in on the biggest stage. It's a hell of a challenge.
And the least favorite part? Travel, I'm guessing.
Travel, being away from your family. If well, you travel some too.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you're a Marriott guy, but
I
on
am.
my Marriott app, it actually shows the number of nights that I've spent, in my career. And last time I checked, it was around 3,900 nights. Well, that's 9 years when you add
Yeah,
it up. So I've missed 9 years of life of my family, and my daughter's 20, my son will soon be 18, so that's half their life.
yeah.
Um, that's the downside.
How did speaking of your kids, like how did this newfound faith resonate in your family and within your household? Because your kids were, you said 7 years ago, I think, that you came to the Lord or came back to the Lord. So your kids were middle school, elementary school age, and they had seen a dad that might have been a little different maybe before that, maybe not much different, but certainly faith becomes a priority. I think the first place that can hit is the home, and hopefully in a good way. How have you seen that as a parent, as a dad?
Yeah, well, like you said, when you do surrender, you're now on fire. And I came home and my wife thought I hit my head. Um,
Let's
so
get
I
the
guess the
hospital and
big
Pat for some concussion protocol or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I went from a lukewarm Christian to one that was on fire, and I think that would be probably the description that the kids would use is the intensity just got turned up a little bit. That's all.
Yeah,
But
no, that's good. You have a 20-year-old. I have a 20-year-old. My daughter's going into college, her third year, up in Indiana Wesleyan. I'm just wondering how maybe we can just talk this through as dads of a 20-year-old. Like, how's this been for you navigating being the dad of a daughter? It's one of it's my greatest blessing. I tell people is my daughter in raising her, but there were some challenging times too, especially in those middle school years. What's it been like for you to be the dad of a daughter who's now just like me, now 20, and you and I being the same age? Like, it's kind of really fascinating, I think.
well, they say God has a sense of humor. I
Yeah.
believe that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's and I have one of each, so it's good to to have the difference.
Yeah,
They're both great kids. Being gone, half their life, your wife ends up raising them. So the fact that they turned out okay is credit to her, not
sure.
me. You handle daughters differently than sons, and yet you try to be also consistent. So yeah, it's kind of a fine line. Besides your daughter and any other kids?
No, just one. One. I
Okay.
don't have I have nephews and nieces. I mean, I'm in the teens on how many nephews and nieces I have, but my own, I have one. So I only know how to be a dad to a daughter, but I think it's just an interesting evolution and stage of where they're at now because they're adults. They're still our kids, but they're 20, and you're like, you turn into more of a mentor, I think, than a disciplinarian. I feel like when she was 14 and 15 and 16, I'm like, here's what you got to do to get to where we got to get to. And now it's kind of like, all right, what advice do you need here? If you want my advice or if you want my opinion, I'll give it to you. But I can't. I always tell this to her too. Like I can't tell you to do really anything other than what happens in this house because this is where you live. But if you go out there, you're making the choices now, and I'll always be there for you. So it's a pivot, right? Like as a dad, it's just an interesting stage of life.
I would agree with that. It was easy with Danielle. She's as a kid she was a rule follower, rule follower.
Yeah,
And so she was. I mean, she was a. What I say was, she is a great kid. But
yes,
she was really easy. Um, so I'm blessed. We're blessed.
that's good.
Um, yeah.
Well, I think about like the next stage, right? Like once they graduate college, they go into the world, they start working. Eventually, they meet somebody, they get married, hopefully have kids, and then you become in this stage of life where it's like grandparenting and all that. And I'm not there yet. My brother is there. He got married young and then had kids young, and now they're getting married and having kids young. So he's at a different stage than I am, even though he's younger than me, and he's got 4 grandchildren. But it's like this stages of life that change, and I'm sure it's you still love your kids obviously the way you love them, but it's a different. I don't know, every stage is different, right? Like it felt like high school was different. Middle school was probably the most challenging time just because they're weird, right? Like they're in that weird transition stage of being little kids to being a little bit more grown up. And then you get to high school and now you're into college and they're independent and they're on their own. I mean, I'm trying to just enjoy it all, I guess, right? That's the best advice probably any of us can get.
Yeah. I mean, I'm having enough trouble trying to digest 50, and you're already talking about grandchildren. Thank you.
I'm not rushing it, Pat. I'm not rushing it. I don't have any grandkids yet either, and I'm good with that. But I did tell my daughter, like, someday I think your dad wants to be a grandfather, but we're not like pushing this. No, that's my brother. I tell my brother he's 48. He was married at like 22, had a kid at 23. That kid got married at, when he was in his early mid 40s and then had 2 kids. Like it's just happening quickly for him. And I'm like calling him the old man, and he's my younger brother. But you and I are good. I think we're good. It sounds like at least we're good right now.
Agreed.
50. How is 50 for you? Because for me, I didn't like the sound of being 50. Like the word 50 bothered me, but I felt great. I kind of embraced it, and it was also kind of a reflection time for me to be like, all right, that's a weird number here. We're in the third quarter now, most likely of our lives. Like it was interesting to kind of do a lot of reflecting. Did you do that as well?
I did. In fact, my wife and I just got back from a trip to Napa Valley.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
We were out there celebrating Jesus's first miracle, and we wanted to do something for because she turns 50 in September. Whoops,
Okay.
sorry, honey.
Yeah.
Anyway, so jokingly, I said, "Well, you want to go to Napa, or do you want to get his and her colonoscopies? It's up to you." And she picked Napa,
That's a
and it was a great trip.
that's a
It
good
was a great trip. Yep, great trip.
his and hers colonoscopies. Yeah, these are things I just went to my doctor in June and I'm like, why are we talking about this? I guess this is what we're talking about now. At 50, you have to get certain things done. I don't know. Yeah. I'm glad you
Yeah,
chose Napa. I'll say that.
me too.
Pat Fraher is with us here on Sports Spectrum, NBA official. I do want to ask you about some of the experiences that you've had since the last time we had you on, because when we talked last time, it was before the bubble actually took place, if you remember the NBA bubble for those listening. And you got a chance to go and be an official in that bubble, but also to be a referee in an NBA Finals game with the Lakers, and I believe it was the Heat at that time in 2020. If you can, take us back to that experience and even just the opportunity, again, within the realm of no fans, but still a lot of people watching, what that experience was like for you to get that opportunity to ref an NBA Finals.
Yeah, it was surreal. The bubble was surreal. If you've ever watched the movie Groundhog Day, that's what it was.
Yeah.
The same day, 93 days in a row. I was fortunate to get selected for the finals that year. Um, and one of my favorite stories that I like telling about that is it was um, it was the day of my first finals game. And of course, I can't sleep. I'm all jacked up and I didn't know what else to do. So I'm pacing around my room and so I just decided, to open the Bible and begin to read where I had left off. Um, but before I started, this time, I asked God to speak to me and give me a takeaway that I can use tonight. And I was in Luke 15. I literally just picked up where I left off. And so I started to read the parable of the prodigal son. And of course, he squandered his father's inheritance on himself and now found himself empty and desperate and decided to come back to his father. Well, I could relate to that as I was reading it because I'd squandered my blessing, definitely of this job on myself, pursuing my own glory and fame and fortune. But and like him, I remember feeling empty and desperate as well. So I decided to come back to the Father 7 years ago. Um, but at the time, it was beginning to hit me. These stories were paralleling each other. So then I get down to verse 20, and it says, "And he arose and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced and kissed him."
Yeah.
Verse 21. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." And I remembered feeling the same way when I repented. Then verse 22 comes up. But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him and put a ring on his hand." And I stopped right there. And then it hit me. This parable is exactly how the father was treating me. So after I returned to the father, he gave me a robe and a ring. Do you know that when you work the finals, you receive two things: the white finals jacket and a finals ring? So
Wow.
I had received the best robe of the profession, and he put a ring on my hand. So both redemption stories ended in a robe and a ring. And if that ain't God speaking, I don't know what is.
Wow, that's phenomenal. I love that story. Prodigal Son story might be one of the best depictions of how nobody can ever be too far away from God, which I love. That's awesome. So did you have those framed, or like is that something you just wear like to Napa, when you're going out with your wife? Are you breaking
Yeah,
the finals
I
ring?
mow the lawn in it. No, I'm kidding. I gave my first one to my dad, who's was instrumental in my officiating career, and my wife got the second one.
That's awesome. Did your dad ref? Was he an official as well?
He still refs to
He's
this
still an
day.
official. Wow.
Yes, he's still at it. Yep.
Where's he officiating? Where can we check out your dad sometime?
He lives outside Des Moines, Iowa, and right now he's still doing the youth and the youth basketball, youth and grade school.
That's phenomenal. I love that. That's a great
Yeah.
story. What was the experience like of just refereeing a finals? You also got the selection a year later in 2021, where we actually had a little more fans, and it was in July as opposed to, I guess, October. Still not fully back to normal, but closer, if you will. In 2021, that was the Bucks and the Suns.
Yes.
What were those two experiences like? Compare and contrast them being in a finals game, and um, I guess, do you have to lock in even more? I mean, obviously, maybe that's a dumb question because you want to lock in every game, but I feel, it's ratcheted up, right? All of the attention, all of the the scrutiny, if you will. The players are probably a little bit more on edge, I would imagine, in a playoff game, particularly a finals game. So can you describe that for those of us who never get that opportunity or get to kind of understand that?
Yeah, I would just say it's the brightest stage in the world. It doesn't get any more bright than that. And due to all of the reasons you just named. So the stakes are the highest. Um, you know, people are on edge and they're all jacked up and ready to go. Um, and because of which it actually helps you to lock in.
Hmm.
Because you have a job to do and there's just so much outside noise that um, it almost cancels itself out where and now it becomes kind of this inner calm where you can relax and or try to and do your job.
You're more nervous in an NBA Finals game, or maybe that very first game that you ever officiated in the NBA?
It's a different kind of nervousness, right?
Yeah.
I like asking referees, before, when I do instruct, and are you nervous or are you excited? And they got to think about it because the butterflies in their stomach feel the same whether you're nervous or excited. So I try to tell them, hey, choose excitement over nervousness. So I was nervous in my first game, but I was excited in the finals.
What was your first game? Can you take us back to that?
I believe it was Boston at Cleveland, um,
Okay.
and I don't believe it was protested. So I we it's a joke. Um, I It was a long time ago, but
Yeah, inside.
yeah,
By the way, people probably like, what does that mean, protested?
yeah,
That means
that's
that you did your job. That neither
yeah.
team protested any calls you made, right?
We got out of there unscathed. Yes,
Yes, that's good. That's half the battle, right?
yes.
Obviously. That's good, man. It was making me think through like 7 years ago and everything that you shared about your faith. Did it change any of the way that you approach faith in the midst of a game? Obviously, you're officiating a game; it's the same. But are you more conscious of or cognizant of your faith? Are you praying at all, like in the middle of a game? I've talked to players, coaches on all different levels at all in all different sports, and many of them say, "Yeah, I have." Sort of prayer is a big part of what I do, and talking to God. And is that something that's kind of evolved for you these last 7 years?
Yeah, I mean, I would in general describe my faith as just an ongoing conversation uh, with God, and there's crossover when you look at officiating. We talk about self-talk being important, getting your focus where it needs to be. So there's this a lot of internal dialogue that happens during a game. Um, but Yeah, so that I guess that's how I would describe it. Other playoff games have helped get to kind of how I approach games now, because uh, we're going back a couple of years, but do you remember the year where Golden State and Houston had that wonderful series?
I do. Was that the Chris Paul injury series, 2018 maybe?
Oh,
2017?
I mean the
Sounds
years
right.
kind of run together, but we I had game two, and there was just a lot of scrutiny that was gonna come on game two, and God gives you little moments that He lets you know that He's with you. So that day, I remember asking, um, Jesus to be with me out there as our crew was about to be thrown into the fire of game two. And that very day, I ran across a Bible verse, and it was Daniel 3:25, and it said, "He answered and said, But I see four men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the fourth is like the son of the gods." Now that's from when uh, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the furnace.
Sure.
Now I didn't. I guess I wasn't even thinking about that, but I remember saying, you know what, we're going to be thrown on the fire here. I need you tonight. And lo and behold, this verse comes up that there was, three people thrown into the fire and there was a fourth. And that night I felt his presence out there. He was out there with us.
That's awesome.
And so I know he's out there, and that calms me down and relaxes me.
You have fellow brothers in Christ that you're able to connect with, because obviously you're kind of assigned to different games and probably different crews. I don't think it's the same crew every game. And I'm sure there's people from all different faiths, religions, backgrounds, beliefs, whatever it is. But are you able to kind of find a fellowship within or brothership within the NBA referee community that you can connect with?
Sure, there's a fellowship. There's a contingent of strong believers. Absolutely.
And that helps, I would imagine, like even if it's, a long season, you're traveling, like you said, 9 years of being away in, 3,000 hotel rooms or whatever it was. Are you able to kind of find a Bible study or something that you can stay rooted with Christ in with fellow believers in the midst of a long season?
Yes. In fact, I mean, perfect time for a plug. Um, a NCAA college referee, Nate Harris, and his wife Jessica started a Monday night devotional over Zoom. But there's 40 people that get on across the world. Really, we got people from Australia and other parts, and they're all referees that are believers.
That's phenomenal. And so you guys are able to encourage each other. Obviously, you might have a game on some Monday nights, but otherwise, you're able to even be in a hotel room or whatever and jump on a call like that. That's got to help you, because I would imagine it can be pretty lonely on the road.
Absolutely, and they tape them, so there's recaps that are sent out. But you're on a flight, you're in a hotel room, you're bored out of your mind. There's ways to stay connected.
No, that's good. That's good. Recently, what's a verse or scripture as we wind down here that's been kind of encouraging you lately? Something that you've shared some great verses in the prodigal son story, phenomenal. The Daniel 3 story. I mean, 3 referees, 3 going into the furnace. Really fascinating parallels. But what's some scripture, some verses that's been kind of encouraging you lately in the last few months or so?
Oh yeah, I got a encouraging story for you. It's called the gospel, and
That's a good
it
one.
doesn't it doesn't. Yeah, have you heard of it? It
I've heard
doesn't get more encouraging than that.
it.
It happens to be all through the Bible, but I recently read it in Romans 5, and I would say just look at 8 through 10, and it says that, but God shows His love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by His blood, much more shall we be saved by Him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son, much more, now that we are reconciled,
Hmm.
shall we be saved by His life. Now, it doesn't get more encouraging than that.
Yeah.
Um,
Plaster that one up on the wall and just read it every day, right? That's it.
yeah, because a lot of times I think that the message uh, gets left at, well, Jesus loves you, and which is true, He does. But then again, so does Barney the dinosaur. So people need to know just how much He loves us. It was enough to come and die for us, even though we didn't deserve it, to save us from the wrath of God that we do deserve. See, that's crazy. So remember, He didn't have to come to save us. He was the only qualified person that that could have been the perfect sacrifice, and because of Him, we're now reconciled with God. Barney the dinosaur can't do that.
That's right. No. Wow. I just had flashbacks to Barney the dinosaur, Pat. That's not good flashbacks either.
Yeah.
Late 90s, early 2000s when our daughters were little. Not so good, but it's a great reminder too, to keep it the main thing of who Christ is, why He came to this earth, and the sacrifice that He made, and how much God truly does love us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died. Good reminder. Last question. What do you do in the off season of an MBA to stay? I wouldn't even just say stay connected with God. I mean, I'm guessing you're rooted in a church and things like that, but even more like just besides going to Napa and not doing the, the husband and wife colonoscopies, like what are things that you're doing, in regards to your job, I guess, to stay sharp, to stay prepared, probably to stay in shape too, I would imagine, because you are running up and down a court, for 2 hours. So what are some of the things that happen in an off season for an NBA official?
Well, it differs across our staff. Each person kind of has their own routine and of how they um, address their off seasons. I love the off season. It's like being a teacher but better.
Yeah.
And uh, I like to play golf, so that works well. Living in Minnesota, having the off season, during our 2 weeks of summer, which is
Mhm.
beautiful.
2 weeks.
Um, but I try to catch up for the time lost. So like obviously we'll do our family vacations during the summer, and um, yeah, that's basically it. I've instructed in the past, whether it was at the camp that I used to run with my friend Darren George, or sometimes I'll instruct for the NBA out in summer league. Out in Vegas, and um, it keeps you fresh. It keeps you in the mix, or in the in the loop, so to speak.
Yeah. So you're not, there's not classes or anything that you kind of have to do a refresher course on as far as rules, as far as anything like that. I mean, once you've been in this for 20 years, you kind of know what it is. Unless there's a rule change, then you probably have to make sure you're caught up on that.
Yeah, all of that is basically addressed at our preseason camp, which is 5 days, um, you know, all classroom, right? Video testing, rules,
So that's something
you
you
know,
do every year before the season
every
starts,
year.
every
Yep,
official.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
There you go. Awesome. Pat, this is great, man. I'm so glad you were willing to come back on the show. Love your story. Keep sharing it, and I'll be rooting for you, not only as a follower of Christ, but when I get to see you, officiating a game out there on the NBA stage. So thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.
Hey, thanks for watching Sports Spectrum here on YouTube. You can click our next video, or you can check out our website, sportsspectrum.com.